All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're digging into something that's a real cornerstone of American democracy, the 24th Amendment. Now, it was designed to get rid of a very specific barrier to voting, the poll tax. But you know what? The debate that it started is so far from over. We're going to explore how the fight against a simple fee has turned into this really complex argument about the hidden costs of just casting a ballot today.
So, let me just ask you this straight up. What if you had to pay to vote? And I don't mean in some abstract way, I mean with actual, hard cash. It seems like a simple question, right? But the answer has shaped more than 100 years of American history, and it's still defining our elections.
Okay, so here's the plan for this explainer. First, we'll look at the original price of a vote. Then, how we banned it with the Constitution. After that, we'll get into the rise of these modern, indirect taxes, break down what those hidden costs really are, and wrap up with a big constitutional debate that's still going on.
So part one, the price of a vote. We've got to go back in time to the Jim Crow South to really understand how a fee that seems pretty small could be used to create just a massive, massive wall around the ballot box.
So what exactly was a poll tax? Well, to put it simply, it was a fee. You wanted to vote, you had to pay up first. And while the idea itself is simple, its purpose was anything but. In the post-Reconstruction South, 11 states put these taxes in place with a very clear goal: to stop African Americans from voting. And as it turned out, it hit poor white voters pretty hard too.
And the impact? It was absolutely devastating. I mean, just look at Louisiana. Between 1896 and 1904, the number of registered African American voters just plummeted. It went from over 130,000 down to only 1,342. That's a 99% drop, a direct result of policies just like the poll tax.
Which, of course, brings us to part two, banning the poll tax. Faced with this kind of systemic disenfranchisement, the country had to find a constitutional solution to make sure the right to vote didn't come with a price tag.
But man, it was a long road. Poll taxes started popping up in the 1890s. And believe it or not, in 1937, the Supreme Court actually said they were okay in a case called Breedlove v. Suttles. But the push for change kept growing. And finally, in 1962, Congress passed the 24th Amendment. 2 years later, in 1964, the states ratified it.
And this right here, this makes it real. What you're looking at is the actual document from Congress proposing the amendment. This one page represents the very end of a huge political and civil rights battle.
And the most important part is right here in the text. Section 1 of the 24th Amendment is just crystal clear. The right to vote shall not be denied or abridged by reason of failure to pay any poll tax or other tax. The language is so direct, so absolute. It was meant to slam the door shut on using money as a barrier to voting in federal elections.
Okay, so let's move on to part 3 and see how this story continues. Because even with that super clear language, a new and honestly a much more complicated problem has come up: the rise of modern taxes.
Now, this is where the debate today gets really interesting. The argument goes like this. The old poll tax was a direct fee. It was literally pay to vote. But what some people argue exists now are indirect costs. It's not pay to vote anymore. It's more like pay to comply with all the rules you need to follow before you can vote. And while the old system was explicitly about race and class, the argument is that these new costs have a very similar, disproportionate impact.
This brings us to part 4, the hidden costs of voting. So let's actually break down what these modern burdens look like for someone who just wants to cast their ballot.
The whole argument really boils down to 3 main types of costs. First, you've got the cost of getting the right documents, like for a voter ID. Second, there's the cost of transportation, getting to the DMV or even to the polls. And third, and this is a big one, the cost of lost wages from having to take time off work to get all this done.
Let's put some numbers on that. A lot of states will say, hey, we offer a free ID for voting. But to get that free ID, you often need other documents first. A birth certificate, for example, that can cost you anywhere from $15 to $30. And if you're on a really tight budget, that's not nothing.
And then there's just getting there. Get this, over 10 million eligible voters live more than 10 miles away from the nearest office that can issue an ID. If you don't have a car, or if public transit isn't great where you live, that distance is a huge barrier, both in time and money.
And that time, well, it translates directly into lost money. At the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, taking just a few hours off work to go to a government office, wait in line, that's a financial hit that a lot of low-wage workers just can't afford. It becomes a direct choice between a paycheck and voting.
And you can see the real-world effect right here in the data. This is from the U.S. Census in 2016, and it shows this really stark connection between income and voter turnout. Only about 41% of voters in households making less than $10,000 a year voted. Compare that to 80% of those in households making over $150,000. I mean, that gap is just enormous.
So all of this leads us to our final section, Part 5, an unfinished debate. Because all these costs, they raise a really fundamental question about what it actually means for a vote to be free.
At the end of the day, it all comes down to this one central question. Do these indirect costs for documents, for gas money, for lost time, do they basically act as an unconstitutional tax on voting? Does the spirit of the 24th Amendment, which banned a direct fee, also cover these kinds of financial hurdles? That's the core of the legal fight today.
And look, this isn't just some academic debate. In his dissent in a 2008 Supreme Court case about voter ID, Justice David Souter made this exact point. He said these new rules create, quote, unjustified economic burdens uncomfortably close to the outright $1.50 fee the court had already banned. He was drawing a straight line from the old poll tax to these new costs.
The whole point of the 24th Amendment was to make sure that being poor wasn't a barrier to getting into the ballot box. But if exercising that right means taking time off that an hourly worker can't afford, or paying for transportation they don't have, or buying documents they can't pay for, is that right really truly free? That's the question we're all still debating today. Thanks for joining me.